Hey everyone, welcome back to Zilog and Moto. On our last episode, I alluded to the fact that I thought we should do something different, without something different being a racing game. So far, we haven't looked at any racing game on any of the four systems, so now's as good a time as any to start, right? Well, then comes the question of, what kind of racing game? An arcade port like Outrun? A sim like F1 Beyond the Limit? An action title like Rock and Roll Racing? Well, those are all good choices, and I did decide to go the arcade route, but not one of the Outrun titles. We'll get to those in good time. But as an aside, did you know that the original Outrun is damn hard to find complete? I know it's easily available on eBay, it's not that expensive, but in the last few years I've been collecting, I've never seen a copy with its manual intact. Just one of those weird things, I guess. Anyway, rather than going with Outrun, I went with another title that I would argue was every bit as popular in arcades back in the day, if not more so, and that title is Super Off-Road. Known in the arcades as Iron Man Stewart's Super Off-Road, the game is immediately identifiable as an improved Super Sprint lookalike, featuring an oversized cabinet with spots for 3 drivers, a blue truck, a red truck, and a yellow truck. As you can imagine, the game was designed for up to 3 players, with a 4th truck, a silver one, belonging to Ivan Stewart, and always being controlled by the computer. Playing with a full allotment of 3 human players versus a computer could be slightly crowded, but it was always a fun time, and the game was present in just about any arcade you went to in the late 80s and early 90s. Well, a game that popular almost has to get a home console release, right? Well, it did. Several, in fact. With the game coming out originally for the original Nintendo with up to 4-player support via the NES satellite, and then later releasing for the Master System, Genesis, Super Nintendo, and various other home computers in a 2-player version. We'll get to the Master System version in a later episode, as I don't have a copy of it yet, with it being one of those exclusive European releases. Instead, today we're talking about the Genesis version, one that I have pretty fond memories of from back in the day. Let's take a look and see if it holds up. So the Genesis version of Super Off-Road was released by Accolade Ballistic, as you can see down here at the bottom. And it was one of the earlier releases, so you see the old school non-Sega licensed cardboard box. You see this is not a snapper, it's just basically got a tray that slides into this overlay here. This copy's got a little bit of wear, and you can kind of see up here on like the edges, and especially like right here in this corner, that sort of thing. But all in all, it's in pretty good shape. The box is fully intact and not crushed or torn anywhere. And as we open it up, go ahead and take out the manual. And you see the unlicensed, strangely shaped, tall cartridge. The front label, as you can see here, is in pretty good shape. But if you look at the top of the cartridge, there's this second label that's a little bit worse for wear. And if you look at it, it reiterates that Accolade is not a licensed or licensee of Sega at the time. I don't really know what's going on with this U sticker here in the center of the box. I can only assume that that's a quality assurance sticker from someone who assembled the box contents. I gotta say, it feels vaguely threatening to take the cartridge out of a box and see the sticker looking back up. Anyway, also in the box, we got the manual. And it's fairly short. There's not really a whole lot here. But it does do a good job of explaining everything you need to know about playing the game. Also, there's a postcard-sized insert here that advertises both this game and their port of Double Dragon, which I've heard is quite good on the Genesis, but I've yet to pick it up, as it's a pretty hard to find title, and you know, it's just one of those things where Double Dragon's a great game, so I really want to get a good copy of it. I don't want to just buy anything that I find out there. Also, we've got a double-sized, I'll get this up wrong way around, a double-sized warranty reply card here. I like how... Where is it at? Oh, yeah. Right, I don't know if you can see this or not. I hate to bend it this way, but... there's a message here at the top. There's a warning. Don't just toss this card away or leave it in the box to gather dust. Fill it out and return today. It's like, actually, I'm kind of glad that whoever's copy this was originally did not heed that warning, because it's really cool to kind of still have this. Especially like looking at some of these survey questions here, talking about like what video game magazines do you read and what game systems or home computers do you have. It's just cool to see all this stuff because, obviously it's referencing days gone by and, a lot of things that don't exist anymore. So, anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the game and get dirty. Let me set the stage a little bit. While the original arcade game is Ivan Iron Man Stewart's Super Off-Road, the home version is missing the Ivan Stewart license. Does that really matter? And who the hell is Ivan Stewart, do you ask? Well, no, it doesn't really matter. But Ivan Stewart is a legendary off-road racer who specialized in truck racing both outdoors and in stadiums, which is what is represented in Super Off-Road. The stadium-based off-road racing was made popular in the late 80s and early 90s and was created by Mickey Thompson, and Ivan Stewart was a 3-time champion, winning a total of 17 stadium events over his career. If you were a kid in those days, there was a good chance you were watching Mickey Thompson's stadium off-road racing on ESPN, as it was extremely fun to watch and very entertaining. Sadly, Mickey Thompson and his wife were murdered shortly before the game was released, and while the series survived for a while without him, it would eventually fold in the mid-90s. As a result, the previously mentioned Silver Truck driver was given the initials MT in the Super NES version, since that one lacks the Ivan Stewart license as well, as a nod to Mickey Thompson. Mickey Thompson's stadium off-road events consisted of picking a football stadium, for instance, Los Angeles Memorial, driving tons and tons of dump trucks worth of dirt into the stadium, and creating tracks with tons of jumps and bumps and otherwise rough terrain, simulating what vehicles experience when running outdoor Baja-type desert races. If you've ever seen a dirt bike supercross event, they're very similar, and in fact during Mickey Thompson events, depending on the event, you might see dirt bikes as well as other types of buggies to go along with the sport trucks. The tracks in the game aren't modeled after any specific stadium truck layout, but elements of the tracks do come from real races, and the omnipresent red and white hydro barriers that mark the edges of the course come directly from the races. The hydro barriers were actually an invention of Mickey Thompson as a necessary safety device that provided walls for the vehicles to stay inside. But being plastic, were much easier to move from stadium to stadium than concrete, and when filled with water, provided a strong barrier that also cushioned the impact from the trucks, very similar to the safer barriers that would show up in NASCAR 10 years later. Your job, as a driver of a Grand National Sport Truck, is to compete against 3 other drivers in a 4-lap feature, and attempt to finish on the podium in an effort to move on to the next track and earn money to upgrade your truck, and purchase nitrous oxide tanks used for providing your truck with brief speed boosts on the track, which are very useful in either attempting to catch up to drivers ahead of you or giving your truck some breathing room if you're in the lead. The Genesis version is specifically 2-player, unlike the arcade version, and the yellow and silver trucks are always controlled by the computer, leaving the red and blue trucks to be used by player 1 and player 2 respectively. Of course, the game can be played in single-player mode as well, but your races will always involve 4 competitors, no matter how many are computer and how many are human. Gameplay is very simple. At the beginning of the game, after you give your driver initials, you then pick which button on the controller you want to be your gas button, and which one you want to be your nitro boost button. And that's it. No brakes here. The D-pad is used to turn your truck left and right as you guide your truck through the tracks, around and over hazards in the least amount of time possible. Like I said, simple. But sometimes that's all you need, and I can't imagine this game being any more complicated. Occasionally, you'll get caught up in traffic or up against a barrier and get magically turned around, but that's just the way the game breaks, and it's hard to be too mad about that, because the same thing can potentially happen to the computer. One of the few tracks I dread, Boulder Hill, consists essentially of an oval track except for all the pillars of rocks in your way, and it's not uncommon to get shoved into said pillars and end up 180 degrees in the wrong direction as the rest of the field pulls away. However, I've commonly seen even the infamous Silver Truck commit the same error. The game's physics at least doesn't play favorites. Speaking of the game's tracks, there are 16 of them. The original arcade release only had 8, and then Leland Corporation released a track pack version with 8 more tracks among other additions, and the Genesis version contains all 16. It would have been nice to see some of the other features of the arcade machine, like being able to choose whether you drive a truck or a buggy, or pick a nationality and that rewards you with your anthem after you win, but the game really doesn't suffer without those. All the tracks are entertaining, with some certainly more difficult than others, but they're all fair, and they provide a good variety, so that you don't feel like you're doing the exact same over and over. Some tracks have lots of water hazards, some have multiple paths, but they all have a variety of strategies that can be used depending on your playstyle. Once you play through all 16 tracks, the tracks will be reversed, and then you proceed through them again. Also, just a tip, when you find yourself playing through the reverse of Pig Bog, which only has 4 columns of numbered hydro barriers marking your path around the track, make sure you go around the columns in reverse numerical order, or else, well, you better hope you have a continue available. That provides a good segue into how the game actually works. I already mentioned the general idea was to compete in races and finish in the top 3 so that you earn money to upgrade your truck, but that's only part of the story. The game takes your first run through the 16 tracks as a qualifying round, and even if you don't make the podium, you still continue on to the next track. However, after the 16th race, positions mean more than just money, and a 4th place disaster will force you to use a continue to proceed. Run out of continues, and your day is done. The tracks will continue to repeat over and over until either you mess up enough times or you're just bored and turn off the console. Considering it's an arcade game port, I think this is appropriate, but it would have been nice to have had an achievable end and credit screen after maybe 128 tracks or so. Also, there's not really much point behind having a high score screen or records for lap times if they aren't saved after turning off your game. But I suppose they're nice in the moment for bragging rights in a 2-player game. The graphics in the game are minimalistic, with sort of a Micro Machines-esque look, but I will say that the graphics on the Genesis are better than the arcade machine, with smooth animations all around. Even small things like the flags on the hydro barriers moving when you get a bit too close, or the white and checkered flags flying at the start line, are intact. And there's no censorship of the race girls, unlike other home conversions. As far as the sound is concerned, the music in the game is pretty solid. Each track has a different song, which really helps stave off the monotony of playing through the same tracks over and over again. It is a Genesis soundtrack, and it sounds like it, but I've certainly heard far worse on the console. You're not getting 32-bit wavetable sound, but that's okay. The sound effects are minimalistic at best, but I don't believe the arcade version had a ton either. Most commonly you'll hear the turbos burst or a splash of water, but it is a little weird to have no engine noise or metal crunching when the trucks run at each other. Super Off-Road on the Genesis is a faithful adaptation of the arcade classic, with a few minor flaws. Anyone who's played the arcade version knows what they're in for, and while there's some things I would tweak, it's a solid effort. For that, I'm giving Super Off-Road a 3 out of 5. I've spoken pretty well of the game throughout the review, so the score might be a little surprising, but keep in mind this is a quarter muncher at heart, and it's simply not designed for long-term play. Due to the fact that there's no ending or saving of lap times or high scores, the game has virtually no replay value, unless you're playing with a friend, and even then there's only so much you can do with it. If you're a fan of the arcade version and can grab a copy cheaply, I'd strongly recommend taking a look, but anyone else may want to take a pass. So our look at Super Off-Road is in the books. Eventually we'll take a look at the Master System version as well, which, from what I've seen, seems to be a decent 8-bit conversion, but that's a story for another time. Tune in next time as we celebrate the beginning of the NBA playoffs. Unfortunately, my favorite team, the Lakers, didn't quite get the job done this year, to say the least. But this game contains a look back at better times for the franchise. So until next time, remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.